Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Tape Deck Media.
I'm Chris Chapman.
And I'm Aaron Fresquez.
I'm Joseph Beck Castro.
Cool. And together, we produce a comedy podcast about the films of Arnold Schwarzenegger called See You at the Potty, Richter.
See you at the party, Richter. Like that. You need to say it with the accent.
Yeah, come on. Don't you know accents?
That's not Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. This is a Schwarzenegger accent.
It's an accent, sure. Anyway, listen each month as we take you through Arnold's career, one movie at a time. For each movie, we'll explain the plot, discover some fascinating trivia about its production and promotion, and rate the film on its quintessential Arnoldness.
That's what we do. That's what we do.
That is Joe's accent is a lot better than my accent.
We know you have a lot of choices in the comedy deep dive into the filmography of the world's most charismatic bodybuilder genre of podcasts, but please consider giving us a shot.
Come on, do it now. Do it. Subscribe.
Ruddle me this, ruddle me that. We got the riddles that'll make you chat. Oh yeah, baseline stuff been through this tight. Get your funk on, we're rocking tonight. One more time.
Happy Monday, Ruddle Maniacs. Welcome back to another episode of Ruddle Me This podcast with your faithful host, Taylor Ruddle. I am back from the sort of couple of weeks of comedy tour I did with television's David Correos. We did 3 shows in Christchurch and 4 shows down in Dunedin. I got back on Sunday last week and so have been taking it pretty easy this past week. I met a couple of people at the Dunedin shows who said they were faithful podcast listeners, so shout out to you if you are listening. It was lovely to meet you. We'll actually see you again for one of them. And yeah, thanks for coming out. There were some great shows. Head along to my YouTube page, Taylor Ruddle Comedy, or TikTok or Instagram, where I'm going to be posting clips from the comedy shows. I recorded quite a bit of topical material, some stuff about Elon Musk's little oopsie at the inauguration, and then there was some stuff about David Seymour having to eat his own privatized school lunches. I don't have a lot to plug coming up. It's going to be probably a quiet rest of the month for me. We are working on doing another fundraiser show for the Canterbury Cancer Centre here in Christchurch. Just keep an eye on the Can Do Comedy Facebook page to see when we announce that. I'm not quite sure it's going to happen yet. Another thing that's not exactly confirmed, but I can probably talk about it if you are going to be at the Japan Fiesta on the 1st of March. I believe that is at the Riccarton Racecourse. I may have changed it. Wherever they do the Armageddon Convention, I'm pretty sure it's the same place. I'm going to be doing a short appearance there. I think I'm just going to be helping do some of the announcing on the main stage. I think mainly for the cosplay parade. But I might also see if I can twist their arm into letting me tell a couple of jokes as well. We'll see how that goes. So before we get into the topic, one other thing I would like to let you know about. I'm going to be updating my Substack newsletter very regularly, pretty much every month. I'm going to try and get one of those done every month of the year this year. If you're like me, you've probably been watching some of this crazy stuff from the American oligarchy that's now in charge, and you're feeling increasingly wary about social medias. So, the thing that's always been around is the good old email. So if you head along to taylorruddle.substack.com and subscribe there. I'm aware that Substack also is technically a social media platform, but really it's just a list of emails that you're posting to. So if you sign up to that, you will get my monthly newsletter. There's all sorts of fun stuff in there. I've also been working on... I don't want to say too much about this, actually. So I'm thinking of putting on a very quiet, sort of private, low-key show. I don't want to talk about the theme of it just yet, but the only place I will be giving you the chance to sign up to be able to come out to that, it's going to have about 30 people can actually come out to it, so it's going to be relatively exclusive, and that'll be exclusively for people on the mailing list. So if you want to see a bit of an experimental live performance that I probably will be filming, get along to the Substack and subscribe there, and you'll be the first to know when the opportunity to book in is live. Alrighty, that is we are all caught up. That is all the palaver from me taken care of. So today's guest is Nicole from Nerd Nite in Christchurch. Now, you will have probably heard me talking about Nerd Nite on the podcast before. Nicole is sort of one of the I think founders, or at least sort of the head honcho, I think boss lady, I can't remember. She tells me her official title in the episode of the podcast. And the Nerd Nite Christchurch people are just absolutely crushing it. They sell out pretty much every month, and there's some really interesting nerdy talks you can get along to. Nicole and I had been planning, or sort of hoping to do an episode of the podcast together for a long time, but I think she had a concussion that put her out of action for a little bit, so she was feeling better, and we managed to find a time to make it happen. So Nicole brought a list of 5 tiny joys. There's some very interesting ones. I won't spoil any of them, but it's, a lot of good chats. As always, all the details for Nerd Nite will be in the show notes, and let's get underway. So, Ruddle Maniacs, welcome to the show, Nicole from Nerd Nite. Nicole, welcome to Ruddle Me This. Great to finally have you on. I know I've given you a couple of plugs and stuff in the episode, so great to get you in living color on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Taylor. It's great to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, so like we just mentioned before off the air about Nerd Nite, Nicole is the sort of, what is your official title? Are you the organizer of Nerd Nite Christchurch?
I'm the boss.
The boss, okay. Boss. Like you're in the mafia.
Yeah, it's the international label for the organizer.
I love it. Do you have several capos underneath you?
Yeah, there's three
Wonderful.
Other organizers.
I've just been watching The Sopranos, so that really that was very, I think that's the terminology they use in that. So wonderful. How long have you been doing that for? I guess maybe tell us what Nerd Nite is for those of us joining for the first time, and then we'll get into how you got involved.
Sounds good. Yeah, Nerd Nite is an international group, I suppose, that has branches all around the world that organize a once monthly or fortnight, less frequent event where speakers come into usually a pub setting and listen to typically 3 presentations about a variety of topics. So this was started in 2003 in Boston, Massachusetts, by a bloke named Chris, who was doing his PhD on these birds that are brood parasitic birds. And so the parents lay their eggs in other birds' nests, and then when the baby hatches, it scooches the other eggs out of the nest and kicks them out. And then the parents of that other species then end up feeding these birds. And so this guy, Chris, was doing research, and he went to Cameroon and came back to his local pub, and the bartenders were like, "Where have you been? What have you been doing?" And he told them the story, and they said, "Why don't you give a presentation in the pub?" And that started this idea of Nerd Nite presentations, which spread to New York and then spread to all around the world, over 100 cities. So Nerd Nite Christchurch is one of those.
It's such a cool initiative, and I love things that kind of start off as just something cool that people wanted to do and then kind of grow from there. So that's brilliant. If I understand correctly, you sort of apply to open a branch in your city. Is that how it works?
Yeah, basically you email the boss nerd, Matt Wazowski, not Mike Wazowski, but Matt Wazowski,
Nice.
and
Nice.
he indoctrinates you into the Nerd Nite kingdom or
Yeah.
whatnot,
Yeah.
and yeah, just you get all the resources then to be able to start your own group. And in Christchurch, we have Nerd Nite Christchurch, and then some people were inspired to start up Nerd Nite Selwyn, which is right
I
around the
saw
corner
that.
as
Yeah.
well.
That's so cool. Um, you sort of inherited the Christchurch one, or were you around to found it?
Yeah, it was me and my ex-partner were kind of the people who spearheaded it in Christchurch, and we got it off the ground in 2021.
Wow.
And so we've been running for just over 3 years, which is really
Brilliant.
exciting.
I know right now they seem to pretty much all sell out. Was it a struggle to get them off the ground, or were people kind of there for it right when you started it up?
Yeah, it kind of started up quite strongly. Christchurch, I moved to Christchurch 6 years ago almost, and
Wow.
I saw that the city was coming back from
Yeah,
after the earthquakes, and that people were really wanting to have a lot of things that they could do and like go out and just also there was initiatives to like bring people into the CBD again because the CBD had been closed for so long. And
mm,
so we kind of saw this void, and I loved Nerd Night. I used to go in San Francisco quite frequently and Denver as well. And yeah, we just started it up actually coincidentally at the time that Pachakacha or Pachakucha,
oh yeah, yeah,
which is another group, they were kind of slowing down. But we didn't really steal their audience, but we kind of replaced that like
yeah,
format in the city.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, our first event we had almost 40 people, and then by our second event we sold out. Third event sold out, and so
Wow.
yeah, we grew quite rapidly, and now we do have a bigger venue than we did before.
That's
But
right.
even that we got to sell out a couple
Yeah.
months ago.
I think the one that I performed on was it looked like a sellout to me. I don't know if it exactly was. I saw people walking in and not have somewhere to sit. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a strong demand for it, which is really cool. What do you think exactly? Is it because it's does it maybe the nerdier sort of sciencey kind of vibe? Does it? j- I guess is that an audience that had been underserved in Christchurch, do you think? Or is there anything that you think makes it particularly resonate here?
Yeah, I think it's that like Christchurch is a university city, so we have UC, and there's a lot of technical lectures out there, and there's a lot of like resources put on by UC. Even Raising the Bar is an event here that lecturers speak to an audience
That's
in a
right,
bar.
yeah.
But it's more technical, and Nerd Night is that same kind of lecture sometimes, but more fun.
Yeah.
Or, for example, you did a presentation about pro wrestling,
I sure
and
did.
and I did the evolution of eating utensils. So sometimes it's just
Yeah.
like random niche topics
Hmm.
that somebody's passionate about. And
Yeah.
so the audience that's coming is not necessarily like super technical themselves. A lot of these people just like hearing fun facts and like
Yeah.
having a fun night out. And that's what Nerd Night is like you're learning something, but it's kind of funny sometimes and it's engaging and it's not a dry lecture, but you're still like getting knowledge about stuff you never would have before.
Yeah, I think the vibe I got from the questions that were being asked at the one that I went to is that like seemed like most people there were kind of curious about the world or at least open-minded to maybe a perspective they hadn't considered before. And I know a lot of people were not expecting to enjoy my bit about wrestling, but did say like, "Oh yeah, it was a lot better than we thought it was going to be." So I think, um, yeah, like, maybe not necessarily like the sort of stereotypical nerd kind of clientele, but yeah, people that are just interested to learn about the world. So I think it's a really cool community you've sort of cultivated there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the last thing I'll say about it is the fun part is we have three presentations a night and we don't like themes. So we like a real random variety of topics. So people might be drawn to one topic and then find that they like a different presentation better and
Mm,
they would never have considered that before. So that's the other
100%.
cool thing about it.
I love it. There's this comedian. Well, you'd actually, sorry, this is maybe sacrilegious. You're from the States?
I am, yeah.
So you would know the candy called combos, right? Well, they're not really candy,
No.
they're like chips, I think, maybe. They do flavors that are like off the wall. Like I remember there was one that's like blue cheese and then I think like buffalo wing flavor, and then there's like these two maybe contrasting flavors. And a comedian, he wanted to get them to sponsor a comedy tour where you get two comedians that are different, like maybe
Um,
stylistically, and do like a tour where, everybody's got the candy on the table in front of them and it's big poster behind them, but it's a Christian-owned company, and so they didn't want to do anything that had maybe swearing in it, so they couldn't get off the ground. But I've always kept that idea in my head as like something to think about if I ever sort of have, what do they call it? Fuck you money, where you can kind of do whatever you want. So
that would
yeah,
be
I think
cool.
that's great because then yeah, you get that sort of cross-pollination of audiences, which is great.
Definitely.
So yeah, if people wanted, is it one set night of the? It's
Yeah, it's the
Wednesday nights.
first Wednesday of every month in Christchurch.
There you go. And you have a Facebook page which is Nerd Nite CHCH. Have I got that right?
Yep, exactly. Facebook and Instagram.
There
And
you
then we
go.
also have a website, which is
Perfect.
christchurch.nerdnite.com.
Yeah, and you've also got some very slick new branding with a kind of light bulb beer thing, and it seems like they give you a fair bit of creative freedom to sort of brand it how you want.
Yeah, yeah, the head organization doesn't really care what we do. So we had our awesome graphics nerd, Kate, do our new graphics, which are fantastic.
Yeah, no, they're very cool. Okay, so we're going to do some of your tiny joys. We've got a fair bit to cover, so let's get straight into them. So your first tiny joy is structural engineering, and you mentioned that no one appreciates them, but they're very important. So here's your here's your soapbox, and you can tell us why we need to
Awesome.
appreciate them.
Fantastic. So in my past life, I was a structural engineer. When I was 8 years old, I decided to be a structural engineer.
Hmm.
And that's what brought me to New Zealand as well. I started at Holmes in Christchurch 6 years ago
Uh-huh.
and was working at Holmes in the US before that. And structural engineering in Christchurch is a bit more valued because of the Christchurch earthquakes.
Yes, we saw firsthand what happens if you don't value them. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Christchurch earthquakes showed that a lot of buildings did survive to what they were supposed to, which is life safety, which is get people out of the building. It's okay if the building's damaged because our priority is life safety. And there were a couple of buildings in Christchurch that did not pass that test and were poorly designed engineering wise and led to catastrophic failures in some cases. But that highlights the importance of structural engineers because if you don't have a good engineer designing your building, every time you walk into it, you're at risk. And as more and more disasters are happening and as money's coming in, there's a bit of a shift to designing buildings that go beyond life safety. So they go beyond just standing up when there's an earthquake and go into actually the building can be restored after an earthquake more easily, because that's another reason the Christchurch CBD was torn down is a lot of those buildings. There's a mix of reasons, but one of them was a lot of them, it was going to be more costly to repair it than it was to just take it down. And yeah, earthquakes are a big one in New Zealand where there are
Yeah.
earthquakes, but structural engineers all over the world are important. You have to think about even just people standing in the building and furniture and heavy objects, but also snow and rain and strong windstorms. Like all of
Yeah.
that affects a building. And if you don't have someone structurally looking at it to say, yeah, you're good to go, the
Yeah.
architect's crazy ideas are going to stand up and not fall on anyone, then you might have a building collapse on you when you walk into it.
So that was one thing I was gonna query there is I've heard that there is sort of a, and let's not say adversarial relationship, but maybe a push and a pull between architects and engineers when designing buildings. Is that fair to say?
I mean, it can depend. The uni that I went to, which was in California, we had to take a year of architecture before we even touched structural engineering. So that was kind of to understand the architectural technique and like see how wild and designy they are. My whole first year, I was like, thank God I'm not studying to be an architect because
Really?
I want my numbers, I want my final answer, like I want the maths. I don't want to be just like creative and staying up till 5 a.m. like working on something that's never finished.
Yeah,
Um, so there is
that's
definitely a different mindset, but the more that you can like get to know each other's mindsets, the easier it is to work together. So some
yeah.
programs highlight that more than others.
I think uh, the whole idea of a skyscraper or like a building is just like it's a bit like, people say if you look up at the stars with never having seen them before, you would be sort of blown away. I think sometimes we don't necessarily consider the just how insane of an achievement a skyscraper or a tall building is, and you sort of think like, imagine trying to describe this to someone who'd never seen it before, and I can't think too much about that because I start to get a little bit like wigged out by it. So, because you know how when you're in like a parking building, you'll be like 13 floors up. It feels like you're on the ground floor, but then if you start thinking about it too much, you get a bit, well, I guess certainly get a bit like, I don't know, it's not claustrophobia, but it's sort of a weird kind of like, I guess it's thinking what if this building tumbled down kind of thing. So, um, yeah, I'm with you there that we should give them respect and let them do their job without being interfered with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my gripes is that like people talk about this finished building, finished skyscrapers, everything like that, and they're like, "Oh, the architects are these people," and never even
Mm,
talk about the structural engineers. And
yeah,
it's like you wouldn't have a building if you didn't have your structural engineers.
yeah,
And there's so many trades that go into buildings, mechanical, electrical engineers. Like a lot of people are important, but the structural engineers give the bones to the building. And so
yeah.
you don't have a body, you don't have a building if you don't have the bones. So that's why I think it's important.
That is very interesting how that happens, isn't it? It's a bit like there's this old Disney Channel movie. It was called Sky High. Have you ever? It was a superhero movie, kind of. Have you heard of it or seen it?
I think so, yeah.
The main character is your pretty typical, like he can fly and he's got super strength, and then there's this other character who she's some kind of tech genius, like she can make I don't know, she's just good at making technology that's, I don't know, super efficient or something. And they mention that like even though her power is more impressive than his, he'll be the one that's on the cereal boxes because he's just got that kind of, the superhero thing that people are expecting to see. And I wonder if that's a bit like the architect and engineer interplay there, where it's like, people don't want to think about numbers and they think all that sort of thing is boring. And I would probably romanticize it a little bit as well, the idea of the architect. And so yeah, make sure you appreciate your structural engineers, people. They do good work.
Yeah. Thank you for
All
that.
right.
Yeah.
Number two, New Zealand backcountry huts. So this is something I've been fascinated with. What about it gives you joy?
Well, I just went on a 5-day tramp which tramping, if people aren't from New Zealand, is walking or hiking.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And and that was on the St. James Walkway in the Lewis Pass of the South Island. And on that walk, someone mentioned a podcast, which I'll talk about in a second, that talks a little bit about the history of backcountry huts. And I was like, yeah, this is actually quite impressive and different because I've not stayed in huts in other countries. I did ask ChatGPT, and there are a couple other countries that do have some hut networks, but supposedly New Zealand has one of the largest and most accessible hut networks in the world, with DOC, which is the Department of Conservation, managing over 1,000 huts.
Wow.
So 1,000 huts in this small country is quite a
Yeah.
lot, and yeah, it's easy to get to a lot.
So just the for those maybe overseas listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's kind of like they're not when I picture the word hut, I think of like the small, almost like a tribal village hut, but they're not really that. They're sort of communal buildings that they have like a dormitory area that you can lay out your sleeping bag in, and then I suppose they also have. I've never stayed in one, but they would have like a sort of common area and then maybe like a kitchen or something. Is that what they kind of
Yeah.
are?
Yeah, so the more common ones that are more readily used nowadays do have that of the sleeping space with like mattress pads. Some are better, some mattress pads are better than others, but
Yeah.
and then you have the shared kitchen, which sometimes that has like service gas. Usually there's water taps that often come from rainwater. So it's like pretty well equipped for walking through the mountains. And then you don't have to
Yeah.
bring a tent and you can just sleep at these
Yeah.
everywhere. But then there are some of the original huts that are literally like leather strapped between two poles and you just lie on it and there's like three
Wow.
beds and a fireplace and that's it. Sometimes not even a fireplace and they're like tin
Wow.
walled, you know, like real
Oh my God.
basic. Um,
Wow.
and yes, because the first huts were built in the 1860s for exploration and gold mining.
That makes
So
sense.
I don't
Yeah.
know how many of those are around, but then in the 1900s, like early 1900s, there was some use for farming and forestry. But then the biggest surge in hut construction was during the 1940s to 70s for the use of deer colors.
Oh,
And if you want to know more about that, check out the Deer Wars podcast by RNZ. As long as you're okay with like some violence and
yeah.
fighting, like shooting deers and stuff.
I'm with you.
Um, but yeah, it's so really interesting because New Zealand had
It
a
is, yeah.
massive deer population, and so they sent out all these people to go just like shoot deers, and they were in the backcountry, and it made it easier for them to have a place to like stay and sleep
Absolutely,
before they
yeah.
went out. Yeah.
Imagine, I just think about like when you read these stories, like a pub quiz I was hosting the other day, they were talking about the history of Colonel Sanders, like all the things he did before he opened KFC, and you
Oh,
just think like,
fascinating.
imagine being in that time where it's like they're like, oh, we need people to go and kill deer, and you're like, you've been doing it maybe as a hobby, or you just have some of the gear or whatever, and you think like, yeah, I get to do this for a living for like, what it was, years. I don't know how long it took them to sort of to get it under control, but what a different time that would have been where you could just do these kind of, jobs that don't even really exist today. I'm sure there are people that are maybe rangers or something have to be doing that same kind of thing, but just the idea that any chance I could just sort of walk up and like, yep, I'm here to I'm here to help control the deer population. It just what a different world, right?
Yeah, and according to the podcast, people were making like twice a normal salary. So like there was lots of money in doing this as well. So if
We
you were willing to, it
yeah.
was good.
Collectively, we've thrown so much, like humans as a species have thrown so much money into trying to control pests. Like, there's a great video essay about a particular island in Japan where it was like they were trying to control a snake species. So they released a bunch of mongooses, but what they didn't count on was the fact that the mongooses were like daytime animals and the snakes were nighttime animals, so they never ended up meeting each other. They just both, and then
It's
the
so
mongoose
funny.
population got out of control. So then they put all these public initiatives into like, if you see a mongoose, kill a mongoose, that kind of thing. And it was probably about 10 years or something it took them to eliminate mongooses on this island. And it was mainly just from the civilians, when you see one, catch one and get rid of it or whatever. But that the fact that you can, I think it happens more with fish than any other animal, where a fish gets into somewhere that it's not supposed to be and then just overtakes, they throw off the balance of whatever it is, the ecosystem in the river. And then, yeah, that kind of thing is scary to just think that you could accidentally let an animal go where it's not supposed to, and then you change the whole, the whole ecosystem of that area.
Which, I mean, is New Zealand as a whole. Because if people don't know, New Zealand had no mammals, like land mammals, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Before they were introduced by European settlers. So, like, everything
Yes.
is a result of trying to kill this thing before it or like introducing deer to be able to hunt them. But then there was millions and millions
Yeah.
of deer. Like, it was not controllable. And even all the people that they put in to try and kill them, it didn't control them. It wasn't until they introduced helicopters that they're like, oh, this is a bigger problem than we thought. This is how we control it.
Wow. Oh, so they didn't realize how many deer there were until they could fly. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
There was one of my favorite Simpsons gags was them trying to control. It was like they wanted to control rats by bringing in, I don't know, pigeons or something. And then there was like a snake. They brought in snakes to control the bird population. And then when those got out of control, they brought gorillas that eat the snakes. And then
Oh
they
my
were like,
God.
well, now we're going to be overrun with gorillas. And then Seymour just says, well, when when winter comes around, the gorillas just freeze to death. And like that was the end of the problem for them.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so a delightfully upbeat one there. But so the backcountry huts, I have several questions. Like, when you stay at these, you're often sort of camping with other people. it's sort of a communal thing. Are they ever super busy, or is it you just be, the odd kind of 2 or 3 travelers together? Like, what's the vibe in these places?
It depends. So there's the Great Walks in New Zealand. I think there's
Yeah.
10 or 11 of them. And those ones you have to book online. Like they come out in March and they sell out sometimes within like 30 minutes.
Wow.
So those are usually like full every night. And they are more well managed. So it's like just at capacity. They're not overflowing. On the walk I just went on, so we're in New Zealand summer, so it's a bit of a busier time of year to go on a walk. There was
Yeah.
kind of 6 or 8 of us that stayed on the same track and were staying in the huts together. And then 1 or 2 random people would come. But there was one night when we crossed the Te Araroa, which is the walk that goes all the way through like north to South Island or south to north. And oh my gosh, it was crazy in there. There was so many people and
Wow.
bunch of people camping in tents outside, and the hut was mostly full. So there was heaps of people doing that, and that one was quite busy. But the other ones were
Wow.
pretty quiet.
That's that sort of hiker life. Like, I mean, I've never been into that sort of outdoorsy stuff, but it's great being able to see glimpses of it on TikTok and YouTube and that kind of thing. You can kind of see what it's like. And
Right.
if sort of someone that I used to work with, her and a friend, I forget which walk she did. Maybe it was one of the Great Kiwi Walks. I'm not really sure, but it was up in the north of the South Island. Like it was somewhere around like Marlborough, that kind of area. And she had sort of did like vlogs, I guess, of the thing. And it really reminded me of, do you remember the Ice Age movies? Those Pixar, I think they're Pixar or Disney or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you remember how
Yeah.
there's that sort of great migration of animals where they're all kind of walking together, but they're all sort of they're in little groups and that kind of thing. And it just reminded me of that. And I thought, as someone who's like antisocial, but a little like okay with people, it just sort of like you're around people, but you're not really like sort of bunched in. And yeah, it just it looked like an exciting thing to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the great thing about New Zealand is most hikes around here, you don't see that many people. Like, there are other places in the world where it's so crowded and so
Yeah.
busy, but here you can be a bit more on your own in
Yeah.
nature, which is nice.
I love it. Um, we'll move on to the third one then. So your third item is
Sounds
Kate
good.
Sheppard.
Yeah.
Obviously she did a lot of great things, but anything in particular that kind of jumps out at you as why she brings you joy?
Yeah, so I wanted to, as an American in New Zealand, I'm learning all of the like great things that New Zealanders have done for the world, and Huts is a cool offering. And then Kate Sheppard is kind of the next thing for me because in 1893, New Zealand became the first self-governing country to grant women the right to vote. And Kate Sheppard was the figurehead for that movement. Obviously, she didn't do it alone. There was a whole suffragette movement, but she kind of was the primary figurehead and speaker who inspired that. And it impacts me being in New Zealand, obviously, but it also inspired suffragette movements around the world, especially US, UK, and Australia, because they used New Zealand as evidence that change was possible and then got ideas about the power of grassroots activism, using petitions, public speaking, and newspaper articles to rally support. So,
Because Kate was quite a good public speaker, wasn't she?
yeah, I believe so. So it was, yeah, like she definitely impacted New Zealand, but the impact was felt everywhere around the world, which is why, as a
Yeah.
woman, I'm happy to have the right to vote wherever I
Yeah,
live
no,
because of that.
I'm with you there. I'm glad that you can as well. Um, I was reading a little bit about her this morning, and one thing that fascinated me is so I don't know if it was her main source of like living, but she was the editor for a sort of woman-owned newspaper. I think it was called the White Ribbon. I could be wrong there. It was something Ribbon. And so she wrote these sort of pamphlets and articles that so 1888 was when 10 Reasons Why the Women of New Zealand Should Vote came out, which I just thought it reminds me of how YouTubers will do like these clickbaity kind of titles, or they'll do top tens and everything. And I
True.
just thought the spirit of that has been around for nearly 200 years now.
Yeah.
So that
There
that
we go.
fascinated me. And so I'll read her 10 and because the reason I wanted to read it is I thought, what possible reason could people have for being against this? Because, I grew up in a time where, you know, um, women could vote. Um, so the first reason she's got is because a democratic government like that of New Zealand already admits the great principle that every adult person not convicted of crime nor suspected of lunacy, which is maybe
Oh,
something that
good.
didn't age great, but has an inherent right to vote in the construction of laws which all must obey, which, yeah, I think it's a great point. Number two, because it has not yet been proved that the intelligence of women is only equal to that of children, nor that their social status is on par with that of
Oh,
lunatics or convicts, which is just
oh.
a doozy of a number, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, on that one, she also pushed generally for women to have a place in governance, education, and public life. Because, like, per that point, it
Yes.
sounds like women were, even in public life, seen as inferior.
Yeah, and I know she was also what I didn't realize is she petitioned quite hard to stop the sale of alcohol to children, which apparently was just
Oh,
something that happened at the time. So,
cool.
um, yeah, another thing I don't think anyone would agree, anyone would disagree with, sorry. Number
Yeah.
three, because women are affected by the prosperity of the colony, are concerned in the preservation of its liberty and free institutions and suffer equally with men from all national errors and mistakes, which is, if she's throwing a little bit of shade, they're like, come on, guys, like, we're all suffering from the things you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
I'll whip through the rest of them fairly quickly because I just got the Zoom 10-minute. Because women are less accessible than men to most of the debasing influences now brought to bear upon elections, and by doubling the number of electors to be dealt with, women would make bribery and corruption less effective as well as more difficult. Number five, because in the quietude of the home, women are less liable than men to be swayed by mere party feeling and are inclined to attach great value to uprightness and rectitude of life in a candidate. Number six, because the presence of women at the polling booth would have a refining and purifying effect. I quite like that one. That's like the aesthetics there.
Well, men
Um,
behave better around women, I think is the point
yeah,
there,
well,
right?
that's, yeah, great. Number seven, because the votes of women would add weight and power to the more settled and responsible communities. Number eight, because women are endowed with a more constant solicitude. I'm not quite sure what that word means. Have you heard of that before?
No.
Solicitude for the welfare of the rising generations, thus giving them a far more reaching concern for something beyond the present moment. Number nine, because the admitted physical weakness of women deposes them to exercise more habitual caution and to feel a deeper interest in the constant preservation of peace, law, and order, especially in the supremacy of right over might. And number 10, because women naturally view each question from a somewhat different standpoint to men, so that whilst their interests, aims, and objects would be very generally the same, they would often see what men had overlooked and thus add a new security against any partial or one-sided legislation. So yeah, really just good and reasonable and sort of well thought out arguments there, I think.
Yeah. And the last one I would say is still an argument that's being
I know,
used
right?
for getting women into the workforce more and like leadership roles of you need diversity of opinion to actually
Yeah.
balance the
Yeah.
direction that we go in.
I've been very slowly reading through, I think it's called Invisible Women or something, and
Mm.
I've heard, and I have to agree, it's a hard read because you can only read a few pages before shaking your head and going, "Oh my God, seriously?" So, yeah, that's interesting. I think she's on our $10 note. I think she
She
is.
is, yeah. Hmm.
Anything else about Sheppard there?
No, I mean, like a bit of a controversy around minorities not being represented by her, but
Mm,
in terms of impact on the world, I think she did something good. And we still have progress to make. And obviously, like her
yeah,
10 things, there's still things there that are
still
being
things that a lot
used
of
to
men,
say
yeah, a lot of men
women
need to read.
women deserve respect as well.
Yeah.
But definitely a good start back in the 1893. It's pretty amazing.
It's progressive. I did read a little bit. So the PM at the time was a guy called Julius Vogel, who was the first Jewish Prime Minister of New Zealand. He was from
Wow.
Dunedin, and he was or she was putting the bill to him, and then I think he was putting it into. I don't know how the government works, but something like that. And he was apparently quite a progressive PM for his time. So yeah,
Nice.
interesting couple of people there. I I think that's about all with Kate Sheppard. I don't know a
Yeah,
lot else about her. Yeah, let's move on. So number four,
sounds
this I
good.
think was kind of a little bit of the seed that we were going to talk about initially because you did a presentation, or you kind of in between you were dropping some facts on us about the history of toilets and everything like that. So number four on your list is flushing toilets.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Right. So there's a couple of reasons for this one. The first, I guess, all stems from my late grandfather. He was given the book The Big Necessity by Rose George, and it's about sanitation, about the history of toilets, about going poo in general. And he thought it was fascinating. And he was talking to people, and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that."
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
told me, and I was like, "Tell me more. I need to read
yeah,
this book. Like, this is
yeah.
perfect for Nerd Night."
Yes,
And
yeah.
so, early last year, I read that book. And then, as you mentioned, as the MC of Nerd Night, I do what's called Moment of Science and have like little snippets of facts before the normal presentations, and did one about toilets a couple months ago.
Was that name something you innovated, Moment of Science?
Yeah, so Caleb, who was the other Nerd Night boss in the beginning, he came up
Yes,
with
I remember
that
meeting
idea.
Caleb a couple of times.
Yeah.
That's very cool. That's I love a good wordplay there. So nice.
Yes, I know. Very
Um,
good.
s
But I also did flushing toilets because I just got back from tramping and
yeah,
using the New Zealand long drops. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
I do prefer a flushing toilet to a long
Mm,
drop.
that's
So
right.
that's what I wanted to say. But I have some stats here if
Yeah,
you're
please.
keen to hear about them.
Oh yeah, we
So
love stats. Yeah.
without water, the average human produces 35 kg and 500 liters, 35 kg of solid waste a year and 500 liters of pee a year. And then once you add in all the toilet flushes, that becomes 15,000 liters. So that's
Wow.
97% water. And that in sewers, like actually, according to the author of this book and some other people who work in sewers, that makes it so it doesn't smell that much when you're actually in the sewer. Like all that water actually it dilutes the smell
Yeah, I
and
can
it
imagine
makes
it
things
would.
flush. And so it's good for that, but it's kind of a nightmare dealing with how much water is wasted and then needs to be cleaned, and like the sewage system then has to process all of that. So it's a luxury to
Yeah.
have flushing toilets, and we often in the Western world think of having toilets as a right, like you have to have a
Mm,
flushing toilet, that's what you have, but it's really a privilege. And I'll
yeah.
kind of talk more about that with my next point. But the other reason I wanted to talk about flushing toilets is because there's the New Zealand long drop. And the New Zealand long drop is actually in like not invented, but the particular system of long drops in New Zealand is
Oh,
particular to New Zealand.
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you find them next to backcountry huts or like at trailheads for hiking and stuff like that. And they don't rely on flushing water. So they're under the umbrella of what's called a pit toilet, which is like you dig a hole in the ground, you put a seat above it, and you poo in there.
Yeah.
Um, but the innovation part of it is that it's deeper in New Zealand than an average pit toilet, so it's usually like 1 to 2 meters. And then, from what I understand, I think the shape of the pit and then the airflow system is like unique to New Zealand. So it really, in that way, reduces the smells that you get when
Yeah.
going in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just so much more sustainable because there's no water wasting. You don't need to connect it to a sewer system. And generally, that way of doing it and having it like compost into the ground, it reduces the smells. So if someone didn't just poo right before you, it can be pretty good in there when
Yeah.
you go.
There is a particular um camping spot. I don't know if it's a camp. It's more like a rest area, I think. And I have this very strong memory of going to it. I was driving to it was the Mackenzie country. I was driving down to Wanaka, I believe. And this is something I didn't realize, but we actually do have, I think they call it the high country, which is that sort of bit near the Alps in the center of the South Island, I think. Am I thinking of the right place here? Is that what? Yeah.
Probably,
And
yeah.
I didn't realize It is actually quite high because I remember stopping just to have a bit of a stretch. It's about a 5 hour drive from Christchurch. Stopped at this one particular rest area and it was really cold. It was like that kind of altitude cold. And it actually it has like a long drop. It's sort of like a I think it's a plastic kind of shell thing that you walk into, and it has like a modern kind of toilet thing in there, but it is just the long drop.
Yep.
And yeah, I remember being sort of remarking it like, oh, this doesn't smell as bad as I was expecting it to.
Yeah.
And thankfully it's got like sanitizer and running water next to it, so you can wash your hands quite like well. And I have stopped there a couple of times, but I almost think it's I don't know what changes because I just when I drive somewhere I just tell the GPS to tell me which way to go and I just follow that. But there have been trips down south where I haven't driven past it, so I don't know what changes or whatever. And I'm hoping it's real and not just one of these like theater of the mind things that I'm just hallucinating or whatever. But eventually one day I want to stop there and actually mark it on the map and then try and find out like what it's called or where it is or something. But yeah, like you say, it's for a natural kind of long drop. It's yeah, I was impressed with kind of how not disgusting it felt.
Yeah. Well, a lot of foreigners I've spoken to have commented on how clean and how like smell-free and grime-free New Zealand toilets are in general. Like public toilets, flushing or not, tend to be like around the world, compared to around the world, more accessible, more clean, more well serviced than anywhere else. So New Zealand and toilets are doing quite well. Right. The rest of the world could learn from here.
I do love that. There is a short list of things that New Zealand does very well, and they say that what is the expression? Necessity is the mother of invention, or something like that. And I just think, what sort of country do we come from where we're like, oh, our toilet system is we're really we're killing it there.
Well, it's super important, which leads on to my next point. If you want to go on to my next one.
Yeah, I'll say what I was going to say, but then that does actually relate to your next one. So your fifth one is clean water, and I believe this is something that initially wasn't necessarily believed as a like how doctors used to not wash their hands before they would do surgery and that kind of thing. I believe there were people that were skeptical about having clean water next to a city being good for the city, because I think when you read about old London, apparently it used to stink and everything. People would just pour everything into the river, and it was a whole kind of thing there. Maybe it was the Romans that came up with those aqueducts or something. Some early civilizations, I think, realized, oh, actually, we really should keep this clean. But what are your thoughts on the clean water?
Yeah, so I put clean water in here because it relates to toilets.
Yeah.
And it relates to the fact that, like New Zealand, like we just said, has all this good sanitation and like it is quite clean and toilets are important. And we're like, oh, that's a silly thing to do. But it's not, because diseases from feces and things kills so many people around the world. So I have another fact here about a single gram of feces can contain millions of viruses and bacteria. Wow. And without sanitation, people in affected areas ingest up to 10 grams of fecal matter a day.
So how much contains? 15 grams can contain?
No, 1 gram contains millions.
Oh, and people are eating 10. Oh no. Yeah.
So that's why diseases like diarrhea kill a child every 15 seconds, which means more children have died in the last decade from diarrhea than the total number of people killed in armed conflict since World War II.
Whoa.
And so in a couple years ago, sanitation was voted the greatest medical milestone of the last 200 years by the British Medical Journal because it added 20 years to the average lifespan. Wow. And reduced child mortality by 1/5.
Damn.
Which is super impressive. But then people don't like to talk about poo. And people get weirded out by it. Like I talk about it because I read this book and I'm like, oh, it's important to know. But people are like, oh, it's scary. Let's not talk about that. And they use euphemisms for like the solids. Poo is weird to say. Shit is like a bad word. You don't say that either. And
Yeah.
you go to the loo or the privy,
The
or like
the
there's all these
restroom, yeah.
the
Yeah.
restroom. And then governments don't like to talk about it either, and governments don't like to put funding towards it. There's a
Right.
lot of funding out there for clean water efforts, and like engineers without borders, they go around the world and they install taps for people, and you get clean water. But then someone shits next to it, and then you have an infected water source that everyone's
Yeah.
taking water from. So if
Yeah.
you don't have the toilets and the sanitation and the infrastructure for managing
Mm.
sewage, then you don't have clean water, even if you have a tap for it.
Yeah.
And it's a problem everywhere. Like in New Zealand, even I was living up in Hawke's Bay in the 2023 when the cyclone happened,
Yeah.
and the wastewater treatment center got over flooded, and so they
Yeah.
released all this sewage into the ocean. And so the entire 2 months I was there, I couldn't even touch the ocean. And
Ay
so
vey.
and then there's cities in the US which like they just don't have enough funding, so they just dump all their sewage into rivers. And we think, yeah, we have our toilets, we flush it down, it's not our problem anymore.
Yeah.
But clean water is what we need, and
Yeah.
we get infected water if we don't have the proper infrastructure to
Yeah.
deal with the sewage that we're producing.
It is such a human thing to think. It's like when you throw something into a river and it, it goes away. I'm doing air quotes for the audio listeners. Same with like when you throw something onto a fire, like if you've got the family fireplace and you just think, I'll just throw this, piece of plastic or something on there, and like in your mind it's gone. Oh, look, a waste free, whatever. But actually, like, no, it's just going somewhere else. Like it's not, what is the old expression? You can't destroy matter, you can only change its shape or whatever. So we in our mind think, oh, if we throw it into the ocean, then it's somebody else's problem, or it's not around here anymore. But I think now we're beginning to learn that actually, no, it does not go away at all. And we're now starting to, I think, reap some of the consequences for that. So, yeah, I don't feel super hopeful that this current government is going to do anything about it. But, another 2 years to go, or whatever it is.
Well, I would say New Zealand's in a pretty good spot as
Yeah.
a wealthy Western nation.
Yeah.
But even like 4 in 10 people have no access to any kind of toilet, like not even a pit toilet, like not something that you poo in a certain spot. Like they just go in nature, and it's a safety risk for them getting attacked, especially for women. There's like issues with rape and stuff. They have to only go at 4 a.m. So it's modest and safe, and you just get shit everywhere. It's a mess. India is a really good example. They had a initiative called Open Defecation Free India, which was the
Right.
idea that they don't want people shitting on train tracks and just in fields. And so they tried to build all these toilets to get people to go in a toilet instead.
Hmm.
And the government claimed that they achieved that in 2019, I believe it was. But a
Right.
2021 survey was like, nah, people are definitely still going
Oh,
anywhere.
no.
Because the toilets weren't serving the people of that community. Like,
Yeah.
if a toilet is super stinky and gross and not clean,
Yeah.
like people aren't going to use it. They're still going to go outside.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about this before with the toilets talk, but my favorite toilet that there is a helicopter toilet, which is you poo in a bag, tie up the bag, fling it around your head, and throw it out the window.
Wait, so this is when you're actually in a helicopter,
No. It's a helicopter because you're like circling it around your head,
right?
and you fling it out. But so you could poo in your house that way. It's nicer than going outside. You poo in your house, or you poo in a train, and you just check it out the window, and
Oh, so that
you're good to go.
yeah, I suppose it would be, wouldn't it? It's the ironic thing is, there's that scene in Borat where he comes down to the dinner party with a plastic bag that he's just gone to the bathroom in,
Oh my
and
God.
it's presented, all of his dinner guests are horrified at it, but
Yeah.
I guess he was sort of on the right track there, if the helicopter thing is a method to go. The
Yeah.
I know the one that always baffles people. I never I honestly never came across them when I was in Japan, but those kind of like, what do they call them, like squat toilets or something? It's kind of like a long, they almost to me look like a urinal that's put into the ground. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Those ones there?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
squatting toilets, like flushing ones, you mean?
yeah. They're
Yeah, those are
porcelain.
pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like I think some places call them Turkish toilets because I think they're
right.
quite common in Turkey. When I lived in Italy, I was like, oh, Italy will be like the US. But US and European toilets are entirely different. That's a whole nother topic. But
Right.
just living in Italy, you find squat toilets
Huh.
occasionally. And
I've
yeah, it's very interesting.
I've heard it's supposed to be better for you because like it's uh, I think the way you kind of squat, it crunches up everything in the right way, whereas
Yeah.
like a Western toilet or whatever, you're only kind of doing half of what you're supposed to do or something.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't relax one of your specific muscles, and so you're
yeah,
straining that muscle and it causes more, is it hemorrhoids? Whatever the
maybe,
problem is
yeah.
that you get. And you actually poo way faster if you squat
S-
rather than
So I
sit.
was
So they have little stools you can buy to prop your feet up to get the right
yeah.
angle and different things like that.
So I don't know if I should. I'll tell the story without using any any names. I don't usually do toilet humor on the stage, so the listeners just maybe skip ahead 5 minutes if you don't want to hear. But when you're saying it was faster, years ago when I was a little kid, we was having a sleepover at someone's house, and he lived next to like a kind of forest jungle thing, and
Mhm.
he really needed to go to the bathroom. And he just kind of did it in front. He squatted down next to a tree, just kind of in front of everyone. And I remember just thinking like, wow, that was fast. That was like my first thought. And like it it evidently has stuck with me. And then I'm thinking like, man, is that the way we should be doing it? Like,
Yeah.
do we need to go back to nature in that respect? I mean, obviously not just against a tree and like onto the he didn't even dig a hole or anything like that. It was just like in the middle of the day. But and I should say we were about 5 or something at this point, so we were, I mean, maybe old enough to know better, but yeah, I'd forgotten about that story until until you mentioned it before.
Well, if anyone is in New Zealand and wants to know about pooing in nature, Doc has a good website about like what to do
Really?
and how to bury your poo properly. They even have informational videos, so definitely check it out.
I've always thought it would be fun to work for Doc. They seem to be having a good time doing what they're doing. I went on a road trip with a friend's mother, and we stayed at someone's house, kind of in Twizel or somewhere in that area, who worked for Doc, and
Mm,
yeah, it just sounded like I think you could feel pretty good about what you're doing for the environment and stuff if you're working a job like that, right?
yeah, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
if you like
haven't.
nature, it would be good.
Yeah, I wouldn't cope, but but um, it'd be very. It would be light on your conscience to work in conservation, I think, especially when you hear somebody like Steve Irwin talking about conservation and how passionate he was about it, and yeah, he just yeah, it would be you could definitely feel like you're doing something right working in that line of work. Um,
Mhm.
so we've gotten through your list of tiny joys there. Is there anything else you wanted to add about any of these, or just anything you wanted to get
Yeah.
out into the world?
I was just going to plug two Nerd Night presentations from
Please.
Nerd Night Christchurch that we have up on our YouTube page, which is also Nerd Night CHCH. And they're both about like sanitation and diseases from waterborne illnesses and stuff. So the first one is Dear Sir, Please Remove Your Pig, Life as an Inspector of Nuisances in Early Christchurch by Annabelle Armstrong Clark. And that one is specific to Christchurch of like talking about the different pit toilets that people would have in their backyard and all the issues with the people coming to collect all your poo if your pit toilet got full or like um, just like the smells that were happening. And I believe she also talks about some of the issues with diseases and stuff and
Yeah.
runoff into water and different things like that. So that was a fantastic presentation.
If you
And
link me to
then
these, I'll
the
chuck them in the show notes.
Perfect. And then the second one is The Modern Women's Guide to Dying of Dysentery by Tori Head. And she did a great job. She did like a Tinder kind of swiping of different diseases that you can get from foodborne illnesses or I think waterborne illnesses. And
Wow.
just really fun and interesting if you're into, yeah, the risks of life in
That
everyday
sounds
living,
good.
even in a place like Christchurch.
Yeah. I was I actually had one quick a follow-up question to something you said before about 1 gram contains all these diseases. This is what I found so fascinating is if it's coming from inside us, how come there's so much bad stuff in like poo?
Well, there's more of a risk of getting other people's poo in us. Like if we
Ah,
eat our own, you're not going to have so much problem, but
right.
it's when we're getting somebody else's. So here I have more specifics about it. A gram of
Hmm.
feces may contain 10 million viruses, 1 million bacteria, 1,000 parasite cysts, and 100 worm eggs.
Wow.
So let's say someone has worms and that they're dealing with that problem, and then you get some of their poo in
Yeah,
you, then you might get those worms. It's like that kind of issue. That's the
that's
problem.
right. So it's not necessarily the fact, I guess it's our body can handle our own stuff to an extent, but then
Yeah.
when it introduces something new, that's when the problems happen. I see. Because I remember there was an old, I never knew whether this was real or one of those urban myth things, but they said sharing a bag of chips with someone would mean that you would like eat some of their poo. And I don't know whether that was just
Um,
a thing to, uh, like an urban myth, or if it was a real thing. Any ideas?
I well, my thought on it is hand washing. We
Yes.
learned from COVID how important hand washing is.
Mm-hmm.
There are still people who do not wash their hands. And
Ugh.
so it's more that if you don't wash your hands properly, you have it on your hands. Or leaving the toilet, you touch the door handle. Somebody else
Hmm.
didn't wash their hands. You touch it, you get their
Yeah.
poo germs on you. And then it's just on your hands and you reach into a bag of chips and you have that on your hands.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that I so far, I'm knocking on wood. I haven't been sick. I've had COVID once, but I haven't been sick like since COVID started.
Oh, wow.
And I
That's
think
good.
that's just from being very obsessive about washing hands when I get home and stuff like
Mm,
that. But then I
mhm.
discovered you can actually, and it's recently cleared up a little bit, but I learnt this because you're sanitizing or washing your hands a lot, you need to like moisturize afterwards, otherwise you
Yeah.
remove some kind of barrier that your skin has. And I was getting a sort of, it wasn't eczema as such, but it was bumps on my hand that I
Mhm.
then just randomly on a TikTok saw that it was from washing your hands a lot. So I've
Yeah.
been moisturizing and stuff a lot more now, which has helped. So if you're also like me and suffering from that out there, just moisturize after you wash your hands and it helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a balance of like we definitely wash your hands after you go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Poo is real bad. We
Mm.
just learned that, right?
Hmm.
So wash your hands after going to the toilet. Pee too. I think you should still wash your hands.
Yeah.
Um, but overwashing can be bad too. And we're living in a in the Western world, in a very, very sterile world. And people are then getting more diseases because we are so clean. And our
Mm.
bodies, like kids eat dirt and parents are freaking out, but no, actually eating dirt can be good for you because you're
Yeah.
introducing stuff for your body to like learn how to respond to.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm a big hand washer too, but there
Mm.
is a balance of like being too clean and actually introducing some bugs into your life can be healthy.
Yeah. That's right. I think I have a little bit of that mental germaphobe kind of thing where I don't want to, but
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that we should. Um, but yeah, the hand washing thing, it just baffles me. Like, how long out of your day does it really take to wash your hands after using the
I
bathroom? And
know.
people reckon they're too busy for that. Um, what was my friend and I had this conversation when we were in Japan and using the subways a lot. Um, my friend was telling me that if he touched the handrail or something while he was walking
Mhm.
down the stairs into the subway, he would be thinking about it the whole time until he got home and he could
Yeah.
wash his hand again. And now I'm the same. If I'm in like a parking building or
Yeah.
something here and I touch the rail and I go, oh, yep, okay, I got to go wash that at some point. So I don't know whether it's healthy, but I've managed to not be sick for about 6 years, 7 years, however long COVID started. So
That's
I'm not
fantastic.
complaining about that part. I'm hoping this
Yep.
doesn't mean that I've got some kind of super virus coming my way because I haven't been building my immunities up. But yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think we got through everything. We've given definitely go along to a nerd night if you're in Christchurch. It's a really cool, just like a cool kind of evening to be in. Are you permanently at a Rolling Stone now, or are you still swapping between Little Andromeda and Rolling Stone?
So our February Nerd Night on February 5th is going to be at Little Andromeda, and then the rest of the year we will probably be at a Rolling Stone.
Wow, that's great. It's great. It's a good problem to have, to be needing to upscale to a bigger venue. So wonderful.
Yeah.
You don't have any personal social media that you want to plug or anything, do you? Like, you don't have like an author page or
No,
anything
just
like
stick with Nerd Night. That'll be great.
Perfect. Okay,
Thank
well, I
you.
really appreciate your time. It's been good to chat with you again. I wish I could make it to more of these, but I have a quiz that I host on Wednesdays. But I don't know.
It's also a fun quiz, so people should go to your quiz.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, yeah, definitely go. It is funny how all these sort of nerdy communities bump into each other. Like, you've met Lisa from the board game crew, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who runs
And
Puzzled
then
Pint?
what's that?
She runs Puzzled Pint, right?
Puzzled Pint, that's the one. And then also some kind of board game conglomeration. I'm not quite sure. It's like where you can find board games and all that kind of thing. I feel like there was another nerdy community that I bumped into kind of recently, but I'm blanking on it. So, it's great to see that there's all this kind of stuff you can do if you're not into just drinking in Christchurch,
Yeah. Yeah, there's also something called math jams, solving math while over at a pub.
That sounds like an interesting combination. I wonder if
I've not been, but
if it just gets harder the more you go through the night. I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me, Nicole. This is probably not going to be dropped for about a month or so, so I don't know if that initial one, Andromeda plug, will be out in time, but yeah, it's
awesome.
evergreen. You guys do it every month, and I recommend it. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me, Taylor.
Thank you for listening to Ruddle Me This. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can find me on social media at Taylor Ruddle Comedy on all the major platforms. You can also join patreon.com/Taylor Ruddle Comedy for free, which gets you access to all sorts of extras and behind the scenes content, as well as allows you to communicate directly with me and let me know what you think of the show. Tune in again next Monday for another episode of Ruddle Me This, and until then, Ruddle her out.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.
Hey Ruddlers, I joined a group of podcasters that we are calling the Trailer Alliance, a group of podcasters that share each other's trailers at the end of the episodes and generally support each other. So at the end of each episode for the next few weeks, I'm going to be playing a trailer of one of the members of the Trailer Alliance. And here's one of them now. I hope you like it.
Hello, Like Mother, Like Murder listeners. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather.
We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder.
We bring you the good, the badass, and the crime.
Each week, we bring you stories from missing and murdered
to survivors and women who empower you.
And of course, some mom talk sprinkled in.
Check us out wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother, Like Murder.
And give us a follow on social media so that we can say hi.
Okay, love you, bye.
Okay, love you, bye.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.